What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Krams are here. First time we've all been on a listography in 3-4 weeks now. We left it up to you as to what we would do when we come back. We put up a poll of some of bigger name artists that we could do a remastered listography for. And by a hair, 1% over Steely Dan, Queen won the poll. So that's what we're doing this week. 15 albums. We are not counting the one with Paul Rogers, which I did include in my original listography, but we're not doing it this week. So 15 altogether. We are counting Made in Heaven, the posthumous album that came out after Freddie died. We're also counting the soundtracks, Flash Gordon, Kind of Magic, I guess, is kind of a soundtrack too. So there you go. I think we're all very familiar, safe to say, with Queen.
Never heard of them.
Yeah, I not as much as you two with the Queen knowledge or fandom. I got really into and like obsessed with in like 2014, 2015 of making these playlists and like my own personal greatest hits collection. And Queen was one of the bands I started with. So I haven't really gotten into them since then. So it's been years. Even when Bohemian Rhapsody, the film, came out, I wasn't really all into the propaganda and the hoopla. I grew up hearing them on the radio left and right. They have a bunch of hits. And I always thought they as a group were slightly overrated, just slightly. And now after the film, and like people that are like maybe 10 years younger than us are like, oh my God, Queen, the movie, Queen. Now I'm like, all right, right now they are very overrated. I see polls like on Facebook or Instagram that are like, who's the best rock and roll band ever? Zeppelin, the Beatles, the Stones, or Queen? And I'm like, well, to me, one of those is not like the other. So I don't really get it. But I think they're good. I like them. Don't love them. Probably not in my top 100, but yeah, it's safe to say that I've heard pretty much all of like the first maybe 7 or 8 albums before this. Don't really think anything after that, except probably nothing really, to be honest. At least that I can remember.
I'm a big Queen fan, and in Britain, usually Queen's like rated the number one band ever, like ahead of the Beatles on a lot of polls that they did, which is interesting. I mean, you can kind of see that because they are so British. They are, when I think of like British rock music, British music, like Queen kind of comes to the forefront, not just because they put God Save the Queen on one of their albums, but they're just like embodied that sort of like high society, like royalty kind of sound, you know, the multiple guitar parts. It sounds like sort of like the Queen, you know, like pomp and circumstances. So I can see that. I love Queen. I've always loved them. And I love them for different reasons. I used to just kind of be a greatest hits kind of Queen guy. And I would spend nights on the radio just turning the dial, waiting, you know, trying to find a Queen song because they kind of blew my mind when I first heard them. And then I kind of, like everyone else on earth, I think, grew a little tired of the constant overplay of the hits. And then suddenly, I don't remember why, spurred me on to like go back and just like listen to every single album. And I did, and I kind of fell in love with them again for the opposite reason, all their deep cuts and sort of just the variety and all the like weird stuff that they did. And now I'm kind of still sick of the hits, but a little less so. So I really like Queen there. They won in 74 for me, and they made the top 5 a couple times after that. So big Queen fan, definitely in my top 50, maybe top 25, depending on my mood.
Yeah, I had a huge Queen phase when I was younger. Probably the second band that I got super obsessed with after my Kiss phase when I was really young. But I think it started with the Wayne's World and Bohemian Rhapsody recharting. I heard it on the radio, then checked out the record, and the record blew my mind, and it got into all their other records. So I was really deep into them for a little while, but this was when I was like elementary school, maybe like 5th grade, 4th grade. So this is pretty early. Like you guys, at this point, I'm pretty tired of the hits, but there's a few that still hold up, and I think all the deep cuts are really, really cool. And Yeah, definitely plenty of stuff to still enjoy on their records. Since there's 15 records, it's kind of hard to divide into multiples of 3 or 2. So we're going to do all 15 one at a time, but we're going to kind of keep it brief on the bottom 5 here. Who wants to start?
Those are famous last words for us. We're never brief when it's all 3 of us. I can go first though. I'll jump in. I'll keep it real quick with this one. 15, I got Flash Gordon. Flash, great song. Love the song Flash. Nothing else on the album. Is there even like another song on the album? Like half of it's just like weird sound effects and dialogue from the movie. I don't know. I mean, I really wouldn't like consider it a Queen album, but it is. So I don't know. 2 stars. It's just if it wasn't for this, I would never listen to it again.
I'm gonna go number 15 with Hot Space, 2 stars. Usually I'm the one that will stick up for really bad, cheesy 80s music, but I can't do it here. Sorry. Now, right off the bat, you're pretty well aware that we're not in the 70s anymore, Toto. Dorothy, whatever she says. Yeah, I can't deal with this album. It's so dancey and clubby and synthy, but not interesting at all. All of the songs are just like really bare and thin, just with like a synth line. Maybe Brian May, you'll be lucky enough in a song that'll come over and shred over a little bit. Drums and bass, pretty absent. It's just not the vibe you want from Queen. I don't think it really suits Freddie either. I think this is the only album where he doesn't impress me. I think he's overdoing it here. He's trying to do like that sultry, seductive vibe and not enough fun to it. Body Language is one of the worst songs I've ever heard in my life. And I don't even really think the album sounds good. Drums sound really bad. One song that saves it from being truly awful is Under Pressure. And I think Life is Real is pretty good, but 2 stars, number 15, Hot Space.
All right. Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I thought you might, because I like that album, and I thought you might come to my defense because no one likes that album. So I'm surprised. I thought if anyone else was going to like it, it might be you. So my list, I will say, of all the remasters we've done, this one has changed the most. It is quite different, drastically different, actually. I just looked at it before hitting record. I knew where generally some things were, but it is more different than even I realized. But one thing that is not different is my bottom one, and that is Flash Gordon. I agree completely with Joe. It's basically one song, a couple other little like snippets, dialogue, a lot of this sound that's like do 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 do. That's most of what the whole thing is. So it's nothing really worth listening to. I don't like it at all. 1.5 stars.
Yeah, I was probably being kind with 2 stars. It's not even an album. It's pretty lousy. The bottom of my like real Queen albums, I'm gonna go with The Miracle, and the cover is bad. Like the cover is just one of the worst covers probably ever. It's just so awkward with all of their like quarter of their faces, like this weird Cerberus looking creature. It's one of many bad decisions Queen made on this album. The sound of Brian May's guitar gets like wimpier and wimpier as the 80s go along. And I think on this one, like it's just so weak sounding. Like it sounds like it's through like a synthesizer or like through like 50 guitar pedals. Like the signal is just so like weak at the end that like nothing comes through. And it's like faux arena rock, and like the pomp is just a little bit overwhelming. And I think that the drums and the bass sound really bad on this. There are a couple good songs. Like these are the albums where it's like you can just basically listen to Greatest Hits Part 2 and get them all. I Want It All is pretty good, and Breakthrough is okay. But it just like sounds like stuff that they had already done earlier, just like in worse and worse fashion. So it's okay. I mean, it's not just like a terrible album. I'll give it 3 stars, but 3 stars for me is not something I'm going to listen to again.
Kind of surprises me. I've got The Miracle not in my top tier, but I definitely don't have it towards the bottom. But I do have Flash Gordon at the bottom at my number 14, 2 stars. I listen to more film scores than anyone on the channel, but won't be revisiting this one. Yeah, Flash, the opening theme is great. Because of the vocals, it actually seems like a separate Queen song, like you guys said. But yeah, this one just does, like Jason said, the same painful synth thing over and over and over. And I get it for like early 80s sci-fi, action, adventure, whatever. It works, but there are much better scores that do it better. See Daft Punk with Tron Legacy. The football fight is one of the cheesiest, most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life. Some of the compositions are like decent for what it is, but I'm with Joe. I absolutely hate the use of the audio in this, and yeah, I can't do it. 2 stars, number 14, Flash Gordon.
Well, I'm staying right in step with Joe. My number 14 is The Miracle. Last time I did the Queen list, I had this, I think, a little bit higher, maybe number 10 or something like that. So it's dropped down a bit. I'm not really sure what I was thinking last time because I do not think this is a very good record. I think there's a three song stretch with the title track, I Want It All, and The Invisible Man that is pretty cool. I like all of those songs, and there's not much else on here that I like. And I think this record easily has their worst production, very, very dated and cheesy sounding. So landing near the bottom for me this time at number 14.
All right, my 13, and I've softened a little bit. When I first saw where Jason put this album, Hot Space, I damn near unsubscribed from the channel because I thought it was so ridiculous. And as soon as I saw it, I went and listened to it. I was like, oh, this sucks. I hate it. This is total garbage. I can't believe Jason would do that. I've softened a bit. I think it's actually pretty decent in parts. I really like Staying Power. I think the horns and the arrangement is really great. Obviously, Under Pressure is amazing. And there's some cool John Deacon stuff. He was definitely the most into funk and R&B and disco. Dancer, Back Chat. It's got some cool bass lines, some cool like quasi Michael Jackson kind of stuff. Especially on this like groovy synth bass line on Body Language, kind of reminds me of like Bad and Dangerous Michael Jackson. But there's just, I don't know, there's not that much. Put Out the Fire is decent. It's like the only normal Queen arrangement, a little more Brian May, big guitars, etc. And it's just missing something. I don't think it's a bad album. I just don't think they quite put enough thought into it, and the songs are just a little lacking, but it's not quite as bad as I originally thought. I'll give it 3. So it's like close to 3.5 stars, but I'll give it 3 just because I don't want to be a huge Queen fanboy.
I feel like we're 10 minutes into Invasion of the Body Snatchers here, because I should be the one defending that album, but I have no idea what you guys are talking about. It pained me just not put it at under 2 stars, but all right, my number 13 is going to be A Kind of Magic, also at 2 stars for me on that. One Vision and A Kind of Magic are great. 1 Year of Love is not. Pain is So Close to Pleasure is also really bad. Friends Will Be Friends has some of the worst lyrics I've ever heard. There's nothing other than the first 2 songs on this album that aren't just like these little vapid little exercises or pieces or allusions to a movie I don't care about. So number 13, 2 stars, It's Kind of Magic. I'm sorry, A Kind of Magic.
My number 13, I took some guff for putting this pretty low last time, but it has not risen much. I have 1991's Innuendo. I think the title track, the opening song on the record, is awesome. There's a few other moments like I'm Going Slightly Mad and The Show Must Go On that I think are pretty good. The rest of the record, I don't think is very great songwriting wise. And I think it's kind of like The Miracle, where I don't think the production has aged well at all. I think it's very, very dated sounding. And I don't know, like a lot of their records starting in the 80s sort of have these very, very generic sounding rockers. Like they're almost like sound like they feel like they're required to put a rock song on it. So they just like hammer out the most basic riff. And Headlong and The Hitman on this record are just so generic. Feels like they were written in like 5 minutes and no thought was put into them. So I don't know, not big fans of those songs. And like I said, the production just, it's hard for me to get over it. I don't like the way it sounds very much. 3 stars though.
All right, Jason and I are in sync. I got Innuendo as well. Although I think it's a little slightly higher on my scale. It's 3.5 stars. But I agree, it's got that just terrible production. Even though it's the 90s now, they sort of are still in that like weak bass and drum, kind of weirdly generic guitar tone from May. And there's some cool tracks like I'm Going Slightly Mad, Innuendo, some kind of cool ghostly synth, especially on I'm Going Slightly Mad. But Headlong might be my least favorite Queen song. It's just so boringly generic. It's really, really crummy. But I think there's some other good stuff on here, despite like Ride the Wild Wind, All God's People, pretty generic stuff. But I Can't Live With You, These Are the Days of Our Lives, and The Show Must Go On are all pretty good. And Bijou has a really cool guitar part. But it's the cheesy sounding synths, the soft rhythm section, just kind of, I need a little bit of a break from Mercury sometimes. And these are like all Mercury. I want a little gritty, give me some Taylor and some May singing a song to break it up a little bit more. So it's 3.5 stars, but I don't think it's like some like big renaissance, like back to, the glory days of Queen, like some people do. And I've seen some people even on the channel say that.
Perhaps I will say that. But right now, I'll talk about my number 12, Made in Heaven, 2 stars. It's a big angelic album, and I think considering the circumstances, they put it together pretty nicely. But it's way too damn long, and there's not a lot of variety. Too many ballads, just like this big, fluffy, soft rock thing. Not a lot of fun on it, naturally. And it's just very heavy-hearted and heavy-handed, overly rich. It's like an album that gets stuck in your teeth. Like, it's just, nothing really stands out for me about it. 2 stars, number 12, Made in Heaven.
All right, my number 12 is 1985's The Works. This is the record where I feel like, leading up, all the records are so varied and so different and so eclectic, and they do so many different things on all of them. Then leading into this, you've got Hot Space, which is kind of their foray into dance and disco. And then with this record, they like completely settle into this like 80s pop sound, and they never change. Like once they settle in on this record, basically all the way through Made in Heaven, very similar sounding records, I think. This record is a record of highs and lows. I think the singles are very, very good. I love Radio Gaga. I like It's a Hard Life, and I Want to Break Free. Hammer to Fall is kind of one of those generic rockers that I was talking about, but it's, I think, a better one, a little bit better at least. Tear It Up is really generic. Definitely falls into that category. And the rest of the record isn't that memorable, I don't think. So I think there's a big disparity between the hits and the album cuts on this one. I don't think there's a whole lot to dig into outside of the singles. Overall, it's decent. I have it at 3 stars, but not crazy about it, even though I do like some of the singles a lot.
Okay, my 11 is going to be the unofficial soundtrack to Highlander. I don't even know how it's like the unofficial soundtrack. I guess because there was no official soundtrack, but there's some of these songs throughout the movie. I don't understand how that all works. There's also a couple songs in like Iron Eagle, so it can't really be a soundtrack. I don't know. This album is like straight up hits after hits. Like all the album cuts there aren't even any album cuts. It's all like singles, I think. Like all of these are on the greatest hits. They're all super cheesy, over the top, just ridiculous lyrics. Give me fried chicken at the end of One Vision, just completely out of the blue. I don't know where that came from. Everything else, Friends Will Be Friends. It's kind of sounds like stuff they'd already done with a little more synth to it. But Who Wants to Live Forever is good. Princes of the Universe is fun. And I think Pain Is So Close to Pleasure is great. It's got a real cool like Motown feel to it almost. So I like that one. Everything else, there's Kurgan's theme and Don't Lose Your Head. Like, again, it's a weird album, and you could really just listen to the greatest hits and get pretty much all the good stuff. So it's 3.5 stars. It's as an album, it falls short, but as a collection of over the top, cheesy 80s songs, it's pretty good.
Man, you dish out 3.5 stars like it's an extra side of ranch with a teenage girl with french fries. It's crazy. All right. My number 11, and this is what I would assume is probably the most polarizing album among Queen fans. I've got Jazz, number 11, 2.5 stars. I'm kind of also kind of torn because I like some of the creativity on here, but I also find a lot of it really self-indulgent and just kind of full of themselves. And unfortunately, it could never be more than 3 stars because it has Flat Bottom Girls on it, which is one of my all-time least favorite songs ever. It's an ear bleeder for me. It's a vomiter. Bicycle Race isn't far behind. I did not enjoy Let Me Entertain You or Mustafa. Leaving Home Ain't Easy is decent. Don't Stop Me Now is amazing. And I think Jealousy is good. But other than that, I can't really. I'm going up to 2.5 stars here. But yeah, I found this album very just annoying. And that's it. 2.5 stars. Number 11, Jazz.
All right. I really like Mustafa. That was my last cut for my top 10, my number 11. But yeah, I see what you're saying with that record. My number 11 is with Joe. I've Got a Kind of Magic. I agree with pretty much everything he said. It's just basically an 80s pop record. It's hard to even call this a rock record without Gimme the Prize and One Vision. It's basically just straight up pop, very little in the way of rock and roll on it. But I do think the songwriting is decent. I think Freddie sounds great on it. I think his voice might sound the best it ever sounded on this record. So yeah, really good. I don't think it has any of the like super great highlights the way The Works does. I don't think there's anything on here as good as Radio Gaga or I Want to Break Free, but I think it's a more solid and consistent record. I don't think it has sort of the lulls that The Works has. So it kind of ends up being very close, kind of, one or the other for me. I have both of them at 3 stars. So that's my last one before getting into the top 10.
Well, my first one in the top 10 is the one you just put at 11. I got The Works, and I agree with most of what you said, but I think Radio Gaga and I Want to Break Free and Hammer to Fall are better than pretty much anything on A Kind of Magic. And I think it's just a little more interesting. Like, I feel like bad liking A Kind of Magic because it's just like so ridiculous. And The Works is kind of more like The Game, just sort of lesser. So like they got Man on the Prowl, which is pretty much just rockabilly. It's a Hard Life is kind of like Play the Game and Save Me. And so it just kind of seems like a bit of a copy. It's like after Hot Space, they're like, okay, let's just go back to what we were doing and just redo the game, slightly worse. It's fine. It's pretty good, but it's still 3.5 stars for me. I don't think there's anything, other than Radio Gaga, there's nothing like spectacular or like cool or progressive. It's just sort of back in kind of their rut a little bit. So I'll give it 3.5 stars, but I don't feel strongly about this album.
Me neither. And it's my number 10, The Works. I've got it at 3 stars because I do think the songwriting there's some good songs on here. No doubt about it. Radio Gaga, It's a Hard Life. I think Man on the Prowl is pretty underrated. I think Freddie kills it on that track. Want to Break Free is good. Machines is even kind of cool. I kind of respect them making this record, kind of like what Joe was saying, more than I actually enjoy it. I think it's the album that they really had to make after what they were leading up to. That said, it is pretty safe. It just kind of gets back to what they know. Like you said, kind of return of the game. It does suffer from, it really lacks backbone, and you won't really get, in my opinion, any backbone on any of these albums until Innuendo after The Works. But yeah, 3 stars. Worth checking out because there's a good bunch of songs on it. So The Works, number 10.
Right. My number 10, potentially controversial. This record, I don't know, maybe at some point it might have been like top 3, maybe top 5 for me. And I think it drops every time I listen to their discography. My number 10 is News of the World. There are a couple tracks on this record that I absolutely love. A couple of my favorite Queen songs with It's Late and All Dead, All Dead. I think Spread Your Wings is really cool, but pretty much the rest of the record, I am not into it all. I think they really kind of streamline things on this. It's much more of like a straightforward rock record than their previous records, which could have been cool, I guess, but I think it just kind of exposes some of their songwriting weaknesses. Lyrically, they're not always the best, but they can get away with things when their production's a little more elaborate, and there's a lot of things like pulling you in different directions, directing your ear to listen to different things. But I just think the songs on here are really, really boring, really plain, too basic. And opening the record with "We Will Rock You" and "We Are the Champions," which just like, I have no use for those songs anymore. Like, they're so like utilitarian, like they're only for sporting events at this point. Like, I can't hear them any other way. I can't put them on and enjoy them in any other context. Yeah, so I'm immediately going to track 3 when I put this on. So number 10 for me, 3 stars.
Well, that is unfortunate that you have fallen into that trap of basing it on that opening duo. And I get it, like, those are so overplayed, like it's hard to enjoy them, but I still remember just absolutely loving those songs the first time I heard them. It was like, oh my God, what is this? It's like manna to my ears. So that one will be much later on my list. I believe me and Jason will start to diverge now, but I feel like he might have this one around this spot. I got "Made in Heaven" as my number 9. I always kind of forget about this one because it feels like it's not really like a Queen album because it came after Freddie Mercury had already passed. He did do the vocals sort of with the expectation that they were going to release this, and they did. They took his vocals that he had written and they'd written together, and they took some songs from his solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, and some other sort of songs in the vault. They were just trying to get as much on tape before Freddie Mercury passed. It's really kind of a sad story, but I think the album that they turned out for the circumstances is pretty darn good. It does away with a lot of those cheesy, terrible sounding 80s synths that had really sapped like the life from the band. I think Brian May's guitar sounds 100 times better than it does on Innuendo or The Miracle. I think the bass and the drums sound way better. And the songs are surprisingly, good. It's Beautiful Day, Made in Heaven, Let Me Live. I think it benefits from having May sing some more stuff kind of with Mercury. And it's just really pretty. I think a lot of these songs, I don't know the entire story behind how every one of these songs kind of came together, but a lot of them they had written previously and sort of came back to. So it does have the benefit of being fresher and sort of out of that Innuendo Miracle kind of rut that they were in. So I think it's a very good album. As far as posthumous albums go, one of the best. So I'm gonna give it 4 stars. And yeah, it's a very good album that I feel like most Queen fans, maybe they don't. Maybe I was just the only one who ignored it, but kind of just had always ignored or just assumed that it wasn't going to be good.
All right. My number 9 is going to be The Miracle. And doing this chronologically, I kind of like that they get back to a little bit more swagger, a little bit more rock, a little bit more thunder for the most part. It opens with Party. There's some really cool shredding on it. It's not a great song, but I think it was a good way to kick off the album, kind of make a little bit of a statement. They remember that they're a rock band first, and they can kind of just play with the 80s aesthetic on this one. There are some duds on here. Not crazy about Breakthrough or Rain Must Fall. They got a little bit of like a Toto thing going on this album, I feel like. It's not exactly what I want for Queen, but it's a step up from the albums leading up to this. And I would say that the first half of this album is far better than the second, even though I kind of like Scandal on the back half. And Was It All Worth It closes nicely with Brian May really putting the guitar in your face. However, even though I feel like a lot of these songs are written to be like heavy rock songs, Joe's right. The production and the sound of everything just really wimps it down. If it sounded better, it would probably get at least another half star. It sounds like an 80s pop band trying to rock rather than a rock band trying to like get pop influences in there. So it's almost like sounds completely backwards to me. But Yeah, I do like the approach to this, and some of the songs are really good. I don't think any of them made my top 10 for tomorrow, but I was surprised by this album probably more than anything. Number 9, The Miracle, 3 stars.
So me and Joe, not quite totally diverging yet. My number 9 is Made in Heaven. I agree with his review of the record. I think the production's not great, but it doesn't sound as terribly dated as the previous records. It's just very vanilla sounding, but it doesn't really make the songs like that much worse. And I think, the record avoids having any of those terrible like throwaway rockers. It stays basically within a fairly small box. All these songs are about life, death, living for the moment, not taking life for granted. So I think Queen, not usually like an album band in terms of thinking thematically, but I think this record works more so in that way than almost any other record of theirs, which is cool. I think Too Much Love Will Kill You is an absolutely amazing song. I think it's super well written. I love the vocals on it. I think the vocals on the whole record are great. I agree with Joe that it's nice to get a little bit of like the Brian May and Roger Taylor stuff in there as well. I think Mother Love's a really great underrated song. So I'm at 3.5 stars on this.
Come on. Flash Gordon has a pretty consistent theme throughout. Just burr, burr, burr.
That's a good point by Jason and Cramser with Flash Gordon, but they don't do like concept albums at all. Like, I don't think there's a single band in history that has like more, like they just do not care about flow or feel or anything. It's just like, let's just throw everything at the wall. And except for Made in Heaven and maybe their first 2. So yes, I agree. Very nice. My number 8, I kind of agree with Cramser on this one. This is such a polarizing album. I got jazz. Queen has so many weird albums, and this might be their weirdest because like it opens with Mustafa, and he's singing in Arabic and Persian and like made up language, and it's just so bizarre. And then it goes into Fat Bottom Girls, which is like the complete opposite of Mustafa. Like it's an American, like just like I don't even know. It just feels like the complete like cock rock almost. And it's just bizarre. The whole thing is bizarre. Jealousy is cool. Has like a sitar effect. I don't know exactly what Brian May's doing on that. I love Bicycle Race. I think name checking Darth Vader always rules. The little breakdown, very cool. The bike bell thing they did. It's just another. It's a super bizarre track, and pretty much the entire album is just like these weird little like vignettes. Let Me Entertain You, like, is it even a real song? It's very odd. It's another one where they just feel like they're just throwing all this stuff at the wall, and it's like, let's just do whatever we want. And I kind of respect it because it is sort of less, News of the World was a real straightforward rocker, and on this one, they're just totally turning that on their head, just doing these little, I don't even know. Most of these songs don't have like a super big chorus. They're not doing like the big choir, Queen backing vocals. But I think that it is nice to kind of get a break from all that. Like this is just sort of like a fun album. Don't Stop Me Now. Great way to, like, it's not the final track, but that really is the only one with like the classic Queen vibe to it. And they end with more of that jazz, which is sort of just like bringing back songs that they already did. Reprisal of all the songs on here. So I don't know. I had this one like out of my top 10 at one point, but it's just too like weird and kind of fun to leave out of the top 10. So I'll put it back. It's number 8, 4 stars. But I don't know. It could fall out in the future.
All right. One I've got at number 8 that you guys had out of the top 10. I think it belongs in a Queen top 10 is Innuendo. Really get a cool hard rock, kind of metal feel right off the bat with the title track. I like it a lot. Love the little Spanish guitar kind of breakdown. Cool progginess kind of element to it. It's a really nice, like dark, ominous threat lingering underneath some of these songs. At least that's the intention. I mean, as much as Queen can do that. You get good hard rock sensations, but kind of like in different palettes too. You get some hair metal, you get some darker kind of like Aussie stuff. but still like the Queen brand. Headlong isn't great. The guitar riff sounds exactly like a Nikki Sixx kind of like riff and sound to it to me almost. But for the most part, the guitars are soaring on this, and there's some pomp and heaviness to it. Um, but not like before, but the album's kind of refreshing because it is harder. But then out of nowhere, you hit the middle of the record and poof, it's all gone. You've got like All God's People and These Are the Days of Our Lives and Delilah, like the meowy thing. And then it just goes back to like the harder stuff. Some of those songs really sound like leftovers done heavier from the bad 80s albums. But yeah, I think overall, The Show Must Go On at the end, I've always liked. I think it's a good, just hard rock album for the early 90s. Doesn't sound great, like you guys said, but I'm keeping it at 3 stars and putting it number 8, Innuendo.
So my number 8, staying with Joe again, I've got Jazz, 1978. This record is just all over the place, like you guys kind of said. But so is A Night at the Opera, so is A Day at the Races. But for some reason, this record doesn't like hang together the way those records do. Like these songs just feel so disjointed and like out of left field. Like every track after the next one, it's like, where is this going? Or like, what is the concept here? I don't know. There's some good songs. I like a lot of it. Mustafa's great. Jealousy, Bicycle Race. I don't know. At the end, you get a couple more pretty solid tracks. Don't Stop Me Now is really good. But the whole middle section of the record just really kind of sinks down. I don't like a lot of those tracks in the middle. Fun It especially don't like. I think Cram pointed out Let Me Entertain You as one he didn't like, and I agree that is not a very good song. So yeah, this is a very hit or miss record and just very kind of disjointed and all over the place. But the good moments are very good. So I've got it at 3.5 stars.
Okay, my number 7. This might be Jason's number 2, maybe number 3. I'm gonna go back to the beginning. Queen 1. I never know how to feel about this one. It and Jazz sort of bounce around my rankings. Some really cool like hard rock on Keep Yourself Alive. Doing All Right is not like anything else. Like it's definitely more straightforward than the stuff they would go on to do in the next couple albums. But then you have like Great King Rad and My Fairy King, which have some prog elements, some nice piano. And I don't know, it just, in comparison to what comes next, this feels like a little dated, a little safe, a little bluesier. Like it kind of reminds me of Aerosmith's early stuff as well. Maybe just because of like the blues. It's definitely more apparent on this one, the progressive nature, like the emphasis on piano and the choir-like vocals. Not quite here. Like you can see them sort of forming. But I just think most of these songs, like they'll do better versions of on later albums. So it's a good album, probably very underrated. I barely ever hear anyone talking about it. And you really only hear Keep Yourself Alive, ever on the radio or anything like that. So cool album, probably deserves a little more praise than it gets. You can definitely see the beginnings of the greatness that Queen would soon fully unveil. But I'll keep it at 4 stars for this one.
My number 7 is News of the World, and I'm still at 3 stars here. I've got no problem with We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. I think only Queen can really pull that off pretty much. And Spread Your Wings is nice. Fight from the Inside is really cool. It's got like a just classic mid-70s kind of feel to it. Like it's like Nugent or Billy Squier or something like that. Really cool vibe. A lot of these albums are so cool because they're so varied, but it's also, like Jason was saying, it's so hard to settle in on what the album is, what the unified theme or emotion or style is. And a lot of that's because they pretty much just show up in the studio and it's like, all right, what do you got? What do you got? What do you got? All right, let's record it. Obviously, there are bands that have been very successful doing that, including Queen. I suppose the idea here is maybe like sounds from around the world, but I don't know. I guess there's no glue and that's just the title and I'm reaching. Sleeping on the Sidewalk, I think, is kind of poor. I don't really think it's up to their standard. Who Needs You is cool. I don't know. To like really love these albums, I think you just have to be like a huge Queen fan that can't live without any of these songs, because on their own they're all pretty good, but as a whole listen, I don't think News of the World is that great. Yeah, I think especially on this one, they got lost just trying to do different things and didn't focus enough on each song to itself to really make it the best they can be. And I think it suffers from that. So just at 3 stars, number 7, News of the World.
All right. I think I had this one at number 6 last time, and I shocked the world, but it has fallen one spot to number 7. I have Hot Space. Like you guys said, it's their move towards dance music, disco. But talking about like albums with cohesive themes and things like that, I think this is the most cohesive since Queen 2. And they wouldn't do anything this cohesive again until probably Made in Heaven. The first side of the record sticks extremely close to like the dance formula. It's very stripped down, very, very synth heavy, a lot of synth bass on it. Brian May comes in here and there, like Graham said. He plays a great solo on Back Chat, which is awesome. I used to, the first Queen thing that I ever owned, well, aside from my dad having all the records, I had the red Greatest Hits CD, and I listened to it a lot. And right in the middle of it was Body Language. And when I was growing up, that was an automatic just skip. But I have grown to really, really appreciate it. I really like it a lot. I think the groove is cool. I think it's interesting. And I think a lot of this record is interesting. The back half, they try to force in a little of the rock stuff, I think. They could have just stuck to the formula on side A, on side 2, and it would have been even better. But I think they were a little afraid of alienating their entire fan base, probably rightfully so. So they like threw them a few bones on side 2. Action This Day is a cool Roger Taylor tune. Reminds me a little of like Robert Palmer, especially on like the Clues record. But yeah, I think it's good. I think it's interesting. I think they tried something different. People didn't exactly fall in love with it, but I think it's commendable, and I think it works better than most people think. The last 2 tracks, Cool Cat and Under Pressure, are fantastic. I think most people would say Under Pressure is great, but Cool Cat right before it is also excellent. So I think it's a good record. 3.5 stars, number 7, Hot Space.
Still only at 3.5 stars though, so I can't get too excited about it, Jason. I'm sorry. Although I could have it at 3.5 stars and consider it just sort of So it just sort of really shows how different 3.5 stars are between us. My number 6, we're going to go to the first album to use synthesizers from Queen, 1980s, The Game. Man, I wish they had stuck to this sound, because really kind of fell off a cliff after this one for the most part. But on here, it's great. You know, the album opens with this weird kind of rushing synths into Play the Game, which is just a fantastic love song or heartbreak or whatever. Still has the great group vocals, really great bass and drums. I think as a whole, like the album is more like rock than anything they had done in a while, even more so than News of the World. You have Crazy Little Thing Called Love, which I think is probably the best rockabilly song ever written. You know, just phenomenal. You have some really cool bass work on this album from John Deacon, Dragon Attack, really awesome bass line. I know we're all sick of Another One Bites the Dust, but you know, the fact that John Deacon could have a number 1 song, like he's either the C or the D like level songwriter in the band, and yet he's still coming up with number 1 songs. It's pretty amazing. Shows, you know, kind of the versatility, and the reason why I love Queen so much, because all 4 of them, maybe more so than any other band in history, were able to write good songs, and they were all very capable songwriters, all wrote some really cool different stuff. You know, they all had their kind of own sound. I like it. I think the whole album's great. Save Me, another really good ballad. Sail Away Sweet Sister, you get May singing again, which is always nice to see. Don't Try Suicide, Rocket Prime Jive, Need Your Loving Tonight. There's not really any weak cuts on here. It's 4.5 stars for me. And I just think it's a really great, pretty cohesive album, and a nice way to enter the 80s. Unfortunately, they would not keep up this level of excellence, but you know, the 80s hit everybody differently.
All right, everyone, fasten your seatbelts. My number 6 is where I lose the audience and do my best Jason Reese impression and pick the classic album and put it down low. I've got A Night at the Opera, number 6, 3 stars. This is one of the most overrated albums by rock enthusiasts ever. I think it's fine. I don't understand the awesomeness of it. There's nothing they do here that I don't think is as good as Sheer Heart Attack or Queen 2. Wild and Crazy start, a bit too quirky for me, a little daffy. I want more of like the early rock snarl of the first few albums. Never Been Crazy About You're My Best Friend or I'm in Love with My Car. So now we're just off to kind of a bad start. It really takes me into 39 until I get to a song that I kind of like. Sweet Lady is fine because of the sick guitar. Freddie is amazing on Seaside, no doubt. But just a lot of like bumpy road of random screams and octave leaps and jumps. It's operatic, but other than that, it doesn't do much for me. Love of My Life is great, and Bohemian Rhapsody is one of the greatest recordings ever. Close to 3.5, but not quite. It just doesn't do it for me. With the criticism rain, I'm an idiot, whatever, bring it on. I'm usually the one to defend a lot of more classic albums. I'm the one that picked Dark Side an album of the year, so come on. I'm not always doing this, but this is a case of an album where I just have never understood the universal acclaim for. I'm not saying it's bad, but I think they have much better stuff, and it's out of my top 5, and it's number 6, 3 stars, and I at the Opera, and I won't hear any different. We will delete any comments that disagree.
I disagree with that, but I was, the way you were talking before we started recording, I was afraid you were not even going to have it in your top 10, so I can live with number 6. My number 6, staying with Joe again, we are largely seeing eye to eye. I've Got the Game. I think it's a really solid set of songs. It bounces a lot like between styles the way they often do, but I think it works pretty well as a record. I think the major exception to that is Don't Try Suicide, which is, I think, is an awful song. Maybe their worst song. I don't know. It's a contender. But I think the title track, Save Me, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, all the singles are great. Another One Bites the Dust is overplayed, but hard to argue against it. Just a ridiculous groove, a great bass line. Dragon Attack, probably an even cooler and even better bass line. Totally ridiculous groove on that song. I think Need Your Loving Tonight and Sail Away Sweet Sister are both extremely underrated and very little talked about tracks that are, should get more attention. I think most of the record is very, very good. I think it's kind of cool how they're kind of evolving their sound a little bit into the 80s as well, bringing in a little bit more like kind of funk and R&B influence. So I think it's a very good record. 4 stars. Number 6.
Okay, my number 5 is going to be News of the World. Tired of We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. But I do remember back to my younger days when I first heard We Are the Champions, and the vocal lift before the chorus is, when everyone's chiming in perfect harmony, it's just so amazing. So I still can listen to it. I can listen to the whole album straight through. It starts off weird with those two and Sheer Heart Attack, which is like proto-punk almost. They wrote it in 1974 for Sheer Heart Attack, but didn't put it on the album until now. And then I think it gets really good with All Dead, which is about Brian May's cat who died. It's the opposite of the first 3 tracks. It's very like personal, and they don't, Queen doesn't do that often. They rarely get like personal and sing about their own like less than dramatic lives. So I like the way that comes in. John Deacon Spread Your Wings is great. I think Fight from the Inside is pretty cool. A little more metal on that one. Get Down, Make Love has a really cool bass line and some like weird synthesizer-y sounds that aren't made by synthesizers because they didn't use synthesizers yet. So I guess it's just Brian May being crazy on the guitar. Sleeping on the Sidewalks, kind of like a little rockabilly, but it's probably the weakest track on here. It's Late's fantastic, and My Melancholy Blues is cool, really nice piano to end the album. And, this one probably has the least amount of Freddie Mercury. He only wrote 3 of the tracks on here. So a lot of diversity. It is a little more straightforward, but I think after Night at the Opera and A Day at the Races, they kind of needed like a little palate cleanser. So I like the more straightforward, the hard rock. I think all the band members are playing phenomenally, of course. The bass and drums are excellent on here. So I have it as 4.5 stars. I really like this one.
All right, top 5 for me, and we're introducing a 3.5 star score. I've got A Day at the Races. Doesn't start off great for me. I think Tie Your Mother Down is a little basic, and then after that, I am pretty pleasantly happy with everything. I think You Take My Breath Away is one of the most underrated tracks they've done. I think Freddie is just peak form here. I think Long Away is great. Love the guitar sounds here. Kind of sounds like a Boston record where like the guitars really ring out like bells. And I will say in their first few albums before bands like REO Speedwagon or Boston or them, like the AOR crowd, I think there's some tracks here where you kind of can hear that early influence by especially Brian May's guitar work, which is something that I didn't expect. And I thought that was pretty cool. Thing on this album, Millionaire Waltz, is really epic and great. Somebody to Love is obviously terrific. Just missed my top 10 tomorrow. So a little note there. When they do the songs with a little bit of heart, Freddie really just nails those. When they're just like straight up emotional pieces, they usually come out great. Sometimes when they try to get too cute, it takes a little bit of a hit for me. But overall, I think those songs can be absolutely fantastic. I think Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy is great. The closer, Tio Toriati, I think it's great. Closer, almost 4 stars for me, but just 3.5. I think it's really good. Day at the Races, number 5.
All right. So my number 5, last time I did the list, I had a lot lower and I took a lot of crap for it. And so this time through, both this and Queen 2 rose pretty significantly on my list. I paid extra close attention to these records this time through. I gave them a little more love than the other ones to try to find out what I was missing. And I think this record is still growing on me. So I've only got it at number 5, but it has risen to 4 stars. I have Sheer Heart Attack, their third album. After Queen 2, which is kind of like the most proggy they ever get, this is where they shift away from that, just like every song is its own little thing. And it's really cool. It's a more hard rock record than the first 2, I think. More guitar driven, guitar centric, riff centric, a little bit glammier in spots, perhaps influenced by their time on the road with Mott, which was immediately preceding this record. I think Killer Queen is like the first song where their production quality really takes a leap. Like it is so much more radio ready than anything they had done to that point, especially the backing vocals. This is kind of where they nail that signature Queen backing vocals sound. I think Brighton Rock is really great. I love the campiness of Bring Back That Leroy Brown. I think that's a great song. Overall, I think the songs still don't really stick with me the way they do on some of the other records. I don't think it's as memorable, but I think as a whole, it works really well as a record. I like the sound of it and the feel of the record overall. So you may have noticed that my top 5 records are their first 5 records. So there's a bit of a theme there, really leaning heavily into the early stuff this time through. I'm starting to see what I was missing, but it's not at that level where like of a classic for me yet, but 4 stars, very good record.
You've largely atoned for your sins that you committed in the first Queen album, which were many and they were great, but seems like you've completely made up for it because you haven't done Queen 2 yet, and I think we all know how much I love that album. Anywho, my number 4, and we are entering rarefied 5-star territory. It has to be because it made my top 5 in 1976, A Day at the Races. And all of these 4, well, actually one of these in my top 4 didn't make my top 5 because of just the strength of the year, but we'll get to that later. Right now, 1976 is A Day at the Races, wildly underappreciated. I have no idea why people are down on this. You read the critic reviews and it's like, but it's just a night at the opera again. Like, that's fine. Like, I'll take that again. There's no problems with that. And I think it's different enough and more, a little even more focused than A Night at the Opera. Tie Your Mother Down, nice straightforward rock number, not the most exciting, maybe the least exciting track on the whole album, but still solid. You Take My Breath Away, just amazing arrangements, awesome vocals from Mercury on that, really just pretty. Long Away, Millionaire's Waltz, which I love that waltz time, of course. Incredible bass line from John Deacon. Something like Long Away and Drowse and maybe the lesser known ones. I think they're all really strong. I think Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy might be their best like vaudeville sort of cheesy kind of super English over the top whatever song is really good. I think it's a lot of fun. Drowse doesn't sound like anything else in the catalog. It's this cool like psychedelic feel because of the slide guitar. And yeah, it's another one where at this point Queen I think was so like confident of their own abilities, and they were so democratic in the way they would like just let everybody have their turn writing songs that these albums just don't like hold together as like a conceptual themed album, but as a collection of songs. I just think it's amazing. I think Somebody to Love might be the best produced song of all time, and it's one of my favorite songs of all time. I think it's one of the best songs ever written, and definitely the best backup vocals of any song ever, in my opinion. And it will feature prominently in my top 10 for sure. Inspired by Aretha Franklin, great gospel feel. I just the back and forth, the call and response between Freddie and it's only 3 guys, but it sounds like it's 100, like it's this giant choir. I probably listened to it 20 times in the past week, just on repeat. I can just listen to it again and again and again. I think it's incredible, and I think it's a very underrated album, and everyone who thinks, you look at these ratings, it's like 2-3 stars. I have no idea what the hell these people are on, because they're all idiots, because this is a great album. 5 stars for A Day at the Races.
All right, number 4 for me, I got a very underappreciated album. I got the debut Queen, 3.5 stars. Keep Yourself Alive is great. All of the stuff is like, it's like less anthemic, but still has like the bombast to it. You get some drum solo action here. The guitars sound great. Freddie sounds amazing on Doing All Right. So they're really planting the seeds for what they're going to do over the next few albums, which I like. Son and Daughter is really cool. It's got like a almost like Sabbath-y sort of bass line. I think it's really good rock and roll that stands out from pretty much every other style of rock for this time. Simply just because of the identity and the personnel that they've got going on. And yeah, I think they get better, but I don't think there's really anything to complain about this album. It's just a really good, creative, interesting rock record that puts a stamp on what they're going to do. So for me, number 4, 3.5 stars, Queen, which I think kind of falls towards the middle or bottom for a lot of people, and it doesn't deserve that.
All right, my number 4. I don't know why Joe thinks I don't like this record, but I got Queen 2 at number 4. It was my number 5 last time, so it's not like I had it super low. But I think my opinion of it has risen even just a little bit more. Like I said, it's probably their proggiest record. You've got a few tracks that are over 6 minutes long. I mean, they have long tracks elsewhere in their discography too, but the whole record just kind of feels like a big piece of work. All the songs kind of flow into each other, and it kind of works as a whole record that way. You have always looked at me like I'm crazy when I say that this is a slight step down from Queen 1. But I don't think there's a single weak moment on Queen 1. There are spots on Queen 2 that I don't think stack up. Like for me, the Roger Taylor track on this record, The Loser in the End, I don't think it's as good as his track on the debut, Modern Times Rock and Roll. And I think there's other spots on this record that aren't maybe quite up to the other stuff. But Ogre Battle is incredible. Fairy Feller's Masterstroke's incredible. I love Seven Seas of Rye at the end. I think it all holds together really well. It works as an album experience. I think it's a great record. I got it at 4.5 stars.
Yeah, I don't know why I thought you had Queen 2 so low. Maybe I got it confused. I basically turned off your video as soon as I saw Sheer Heart Attack at number 11, so you'll have to forgive me for slandering you. Much like the band slandered their former manager in Death on Two Legs, the lead-off track to my number 3 album, A Night at the Opera, I think it's better than A Day at the Races, but not like leaps and bounds like better. I think it's superior. I think every track on here is excellent. Sweet Lady might be the only one that isn't like a 5 out of 5. Death on Two Legs, that piano intro is really awesome, really cool, like different sounding guitar solo, the way it like fades out and comes back in. Like it everything on here just sounds so unique and different, and just like them at the height of their powers in the studio, just doing whatever the heck they want. Like there's I'm in love with my car, like completely doesn't fit with 39, which is like about time dilation theory and people going off on a voyage and coming back, and like all their relatives and everybody are dead and aged. On 39, John Deacon's playing a stand-up bass, which he learned because Brian May said it would be cool if he played stand-up bass. He didn't know how to play it. He just decided to learn it just for this song. And it's just, you got like the vaudeville stuff in Seaside Rendezvous where he's doing, I don't know, it's like a kazoo or something. I don't know what the heck it is. Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, another like weird, like he's shouting through a megaphone. And it's just so like bizarre, like off the wall stuff, but they're just so talented. It works. Bohemian Rhapsody, incredible. Just the way it all comes together from the disparate, diverse sounds. I don't know what the hell it means, but I like it. And the whole album just thematically doesn't make sense at all. But I think through the force of their own will and talent, just immense talent across the board, it works. It's great. It's 5 stars.
Number 3 for me is going to be The Game. 3.5 stars. Play the Game is really nice. Opener, Dragon Attack is really friggin' good. Kind of feels like a throwback to their earlier sound a little bit. I like the hits on this a lot. Need Your Loving is great. I mean, the first half is just loaded with great songs. Second half is pretty good too, except for Don't Try Suicide, which is pretty bad. Seem a bit ignorant here, maybe a little tone deaf. I think Coming Soon is good. Save Me is nice. This one is just like a really good blend of pop and rock. Just a really good album of pop rock songs written really well. I think maybe objectively, this is like one of their best crafted albums as songwriters and as players, but I think the ones I have at number 1 and number 2 are just more interesting as rock albums and feature some great playing on it. So number 3, The Game, 3.5 stars.
All right, my number 3 is A Day at the Races, which I think is an incredible record. I agree that Tie Your Mother Down might be the weakest track on the whole thing, which opens the record. I don't think it's a bad song. I just don't think it's as interesting or as well produced as the rest of the record. Yeah, it's just another one of these records that is extremely eclectic. It bounces all over the place, but I think it works pretty well as a whole experience listening through it from start to finish. I think just personally, I like some of the songs more on A Night at the Opera, but I think there's definitely an argument that could be made that this is the band at the peak of their like performance. I think their vocals as a group, like as an ensemble singing group, were never better. I think the backing vocals all over this record are incredible. Freddie sounds great. I think all their playing is really on point. Some of the bass work on like the Millionaire Waltz is just ridiculously good. I mean, I think they're kind of like peaking here in a way, even though I like 2 records more. I think they're coming to like the peak of their powers as far as like their notoriety and their ability and just kind of having the swagger and kind of just hitting their stride, I think. So it's a great record. nearly perfect 5-star record for me.
I think the biggest knock against Queen for me sometimes is they were just like too good. Like they thought they could do anything, and they really could, but like sometimes I feel like it just went too far, and like it was too clean sometimes, which is why my top two from the same year, 1974. What a year for them. Good Lord. A little dirtier, a little grimier, a little more, a little less polished and sheened and just like shiny. But number two is going to be Sheer Heart Attack. I agree with Jason what he said about Killer Queen. That's really the moment like they knew like we can pretty much do anything in the studio that we want. Like we've reached the point. Queen 2, like they were experimenting with like the big group vocals and everything like that. But Killer Queen's really where it's just like perfect. And the piano playing is perfect. And that guitar solo is just so Brian May. Like that is what he's known for. The multiple layers, the symphonic, violin almost sound. And all over this album, you can see them moving away from the cohesiveness of Queen 2 into whatever the hell they want. Brighton Rock, which they'd written earlier, wouldn't fit at all on Queen 2. It's like a modern kind of love story, but the 3-minute guitar interlude where it's just Brian May just experimenting, and that weird high vocals from Freddie Mercury. Very cool, very unique in their catalog. I love the Tenement Funster, Flick of the Wrist, and Lily of the Valley kind of medley, the way it all weaves and flows together. Really cool. Now I'm Here. Got the nice little Mott the Hoople reference. Definitely a little bit of that glam sound. In the Lap of the Gods, you get those crazy vocals from Roger Taylor and Mercury. Just like the way they combined for those incredible high notes is always very cool, and this is really where they started to nail that. And you have some like metal songs like Stone Cold Crazy and Bring Back That Leroy Brown, where they got into like that vaudeville kind of very, I don't even know what you would call it. There's like ukulele or something on it. That's kind of where they would go to next with Night at the Opera and Day at the Races. And in Lap of the Gods, great like stomper sing along kind of thing. It's not a cohesive album really. Like I think it's a little more cohesive than their next two, but it's still very much all over the place. But everything is just so cool. Sounds great. The production is better, not quite as shiny and perfect as it would be, but a little dirtier, which I kind of like. A little more of that rough edge, and maybe they weren't quite so full of themselves, but great album. 5 stars again. One of 2 5-star albums from 1974 for Queen. That's might be the best year ever for a band.
All right. Came down to 2 albums for me. They're the same top 2 that Joe has. I don't even remember. Well, I guess it was Pet Sounds, but other than Pet Sounds, what have we agreed on in number 1 recently? Not much, maybe. And we're not going to this time either, unfortunately, but it damn close. Had to decide like an hour earlier. My number 2 is going to be Queen 2, 4.5 stars. Sounds great. Very 70s. And yeah, Joe, I'm with you. I don't think the argument is that they got too good. I think they just got too polished, like you said. I like that they were just had this grittier, hard rock, grimy bar kind of scene, but with their flavor on it early on. It's got some like Bowie-esque glam to it, especially in a song like The Loser in the end. Really great. But then you got like some prog elements here too that accompany the sound really nice, like Ogre Battle is just filthy and has some like early metal on it. Everything's unexpected. The Fairy Fellers Master Stroke is awesome. March of the Black Queen. Yeah, it's just a really cool, impressive, creative album. But yeah, you still get that Brian May guitar symphony, but it's just everything's just dirtier and a little slimier here. Even Freddie, like before they got too polished, this sound was really cool. And if they would have taken this, well, it's kind of hard to imagine what they would have done if they kept this sound, but I want a little bit more of it. It's very unfortunate. Yeah, I don't think there's like the big hit songwriting. I do appreciate that they want more polish because you got some of their more kind of classic songwriting prowess, which can be really good at times. But man, just for just a straight up rock and roll band, this album just is really awesome. So Queen 2, my number 2, 4.5 stars.
My number 2 is Queen 1, which I think is criminally underrated. Made my top 5 in 1973. I love Freddie's voice on all the early records, the first 3 records especially. Even when he's like singing in his like full voice and not in falsetto, his voice is a lot thinner. And I think it's a combination of him being younger and the way it was recorded. But it just sounds really cool, even if it's not like as hi-fi or as like well recorded as like on A Day in the Races. It just sounds really great to me. I love the sound of this record. The drums are really like dampened and dead, but they're in a huge room, it sounds like. So there is sort of like this reverb to it. It's an interesting drum sound. I like it a lot. Piano sounds great on Doing All Right. This record definitely has its rough edges, but I think all of the imperfections to it are really endearing. I think it holds up as a great example of how not to get too careful in the studio and to leave some mistakes and maybe not so polished things on the recording. There's a lot of really cool effects on it. There's like these really heavy filters or heavy EQs on the drums in the beginning of Liar, which is really cool. There's some like cool phasers on the guitars. So they're from the outset, they weren't afraid to experiment in the studio a bit. I think it's funny. There's parts where the guitar, like electric guitar, will come in and it is so ridiculously loud, like way louder than it needs to be. But I like it. I think it works. So many great songs. There's not a song on this record that I don't think is at or very close to 5 stars for me. Doing All Right, My Fairy King, and The Night Come Down are probably my favorite, but there's not a moment on this record I don't like. It came very close to winning 73 for me. 5 stars.
It is a very cool record, but not as cool as my winner. 1974's surprise winner. I feel like it surprised you that it was my winner back then. Queen 2, I just think is an album experience. This one is their best. You have the White Side, which is mostly May, except for losing the end, which is Taylor. Starts off right off the bat with May playing through the custom amp that John Deacon built for him, which kind of gives you that like symphonic sound. On Procession, segues right into Father to Son, which I think is just a brilliant track. I love Freddie's vocals on this album more so than any other. They're higher. They're not quite as polished. And they're just so unique sounding right off the bat on Father to Son. And kind of surprising, especially since, I came to this album much later. Like I'd already heard all the big ones, Sheer Heart Attack and everything else. So this album in particular kind of surprised me the first time I heard it. And White Side's great. The whole first side, fantastic stuff. Very cool, very Brian May. A little more folky, a little more stripped back, other than Father to Son. And then you get to Freddie Mercury's parts, the Black Side as it's called, starting with Ogre Battle. There's like reverse guitars or whatever is going on, very heavy. All the sound effects that they kind of throw in, all made, organically. There's no synths or anything on here. Proto metal for sure. And the way it just flows from song to song, right in the Fairy Fellows Masterstroke, which has some awesome bass, fantasy lyrics, which they pretty much got away from, starting with Sheer Heart Attack. And I don't know, to me, this one always seems like, Zeppelin had their kind of folky fantasy. This is like Disney, like Technicolor fantasy, where everything's like super bright and vibrant and just completely Renaissance painting. And I just think it's so cool. Even the little shorter tracks like Nevermore and Funny How Love Is, just perfect little segues from song to song. March of the Black Queen has all the sort of beginning elements of Bohemian Rhapsody in it. Just the multiple parts, the vocals all over the place, the stops, the starts, the heavy, the soft. One of my all-time favorite tracks. Amazing drum and bass work all over this album. And then I kind of forget Seven Seas of Rye, but fantastic closer, really great song, a little more kind of straightforward rock and roll, but some fantasy lyrics. It's fantastic. Everything on here, the vocals, the guitar, just really cool. The way it all flows together, works together, cohesive listening experience. And I love it. I loved it since I first heard it. I don't know when. I can't remember why or when I went back and listened to this one. Usually I started with Sheer Heart Attack and just assumed the first two were sort of, because no one ever talks about it. I've never heard anyone talk about Queen 2, like no critics, anything like that. So they're doing a disservice because Queen 2, just fantastic, very cool, very unique, and my winner for Queen.
Yeah, it was hard not to put Queen 2 as my winner. I think it's really underappreciated, but I think that Sheer Heart Attack is my winner. I've got it at 4.5 stars, so no 5s for Queen for me. I think there's just the heights on this are just a little bit better for me, even though I like the more cohesive aspect of Queen 2. Stone Cold Crazy and Killer Queen are two of my favorite Queen songs ever, so especially Killer Queen. And I think Freddie sounds the best on this album, but yeah, I mean, overall, it's such a really cool album. You really get a sense of the playing and the marriage with the style and the writing. And don't sleep on the bass and the drums ever on Queen. Very underrated. Tenement Funster, very different song, very cool. But then just you're starting to get the variety here on this album. But there's like these icy and cool vibes here, especially on like Flick of the Wrist. And Freddie is really good on the piano in parts here. I don't know. I always would take Elton John over Freddie probably, but some great piano on this album, no doubt about it. I think they're better when they attack the albums kind of like this. I love on Now I'm Here, you get that obvious opening that is lifted almost entirely to the beginning of Palo Alto, a Radiohead B-side. So they're shouting out back to Queen. They're big Queen fans, or at least Tom is. Yeah, I think everything just has a really cool, warm 70s sound, but is like more robust and electric and cosmic than anything else at this time. And like I was talking about before in a song like She Makes Me, you really get what will come later on in the 70s to me. Like I think you get like Supertramp and REO Speedwagon and even like Journey vibes here, which no one ever really talks about, but I was hearing it a lot with like the first few albums. And yeah, I think it's really underappreciated. Queen 2 as well. But, these early Queen albums, other than Killer Queen, Keep Yourself Alive on the debut, there's not like the big hits that everyone knows and loves. So I think just like casual fans kind of toss these albums to the side. But man, yeah, 74, both those albums, great. Going with Sheer Heart Attack, though, as my favorite Queen album, 4.5 stars, number 1.
3 different number 1 albums from us. I'm going with the one that I went with originally in the first Listography video. A Night at the Opera, probably the more traditional pick. This was the first Queen album that I ever listened to start to finish. First one I fell in love with. Probably at one point in my life was in my top 10 favorite albums of all time. Probably would still be in my top 50. I just love it. It takes, so they kind of go from this more thematic proggy-ish type of sound on Queen 2 to the approach of approaching each song as its own individual thing on Sheer Heart Attack. And then on this record, they take that to the extreme and make every song as different as possible. But I think it works as a record because you've got super distinctive guitar tone from Brian May that runs through the record. You've got super distinctive backing vocals that work on every track. Things like that pull it together, make it more cohesive than it should be on paper. They start doing a lot more of these like music hall type songs, or like they remind me of like McCartney songs, the McCartney songs that Lennon would call his granny music. Songs like Lazy on a Sunday Afternoon and Seaside Rendezvous and Good Company. McCartney's my favorite Beatle. I love when he does those songs, and I love them here. I think they're so fun and interesting, and the way that they build those songs in the studio with different things like Joe mentioned, like kazoo and like tapping on the tabletop with thimbles on their fingers and things like that. Just so creative. I think the songwriting is really good. I think every song is really memorable, has great melodies. The first time I heard the Prophet song, I could not believe it was on the same record as Bohemian Rhapsody. I was like, really? Bohemian Rhapsody is the song people think is amazing? Listen to this thing. With all the delays and things going on, just blew my mind the first time I heard it. Still blows my mind now. I think it's a great record. And yeah, I don't think they ever topped it. 5 stars, easy 5 stars.
Well, I think we all had good rankings. I'm a little upset with Cramser's stars, but I think we all, there's nothing too outlandish, I don't think, with any of our lists.
Yeah, I'm just not as big of a Queen fan as you guys are. But it's interesting. I wouldn't say that like I need just my greatest hits. It's just, I don't know. I think I don't know what it is, but they've never quite clicked with me the way a lot of people, react to them. I appreciate them and respect them more than I like them. I don't dislike them by any means. But again, it's probably that thing I always talk about. They're not an incredibly emotional band for me. And that's usually what I'm drawn to the most. I don't get a lot of feeling from them. At times I do, for sure, but not as much as my all-time favorites. So
You hate theatrical, so you're not going to find any band more theatrical than Queen.
I definitely don't hate it, but it's not high on my preference list. But then there are going to be exceptions to that at times. But yeah, I mean, Queen is a good band to me. They're not one of my favorites, though.
Yeah, Queen's, I don't know, interesting because I don't think of them in the same way that I used to. They were way, way up there for me before, and they have definitely fallen. Some of these records have fallen down my rankings, and yeah, they're not like one of my top favorites, but I still, hold them in high regard because of how much I once liked them. And a lot of these records are still important to me and still rank fairly high in my all-time list. Although probably the only one in my top 1 or 200 would probably be Night at the Opera.
Queen's weird because they have such a short window of brilliance for me. I like the game and I like News of the World, but between 74 and 76, they had a ridiculous output of classic albums and songs. I have 50 songs on my favorite, for my favorite top 10 songs. And I could see all of these songs being on the top 10. They just had so many songs and they're all from the same era. So just the output they had in this tiny window is really kind of weird. It kind of makes me like them less because I'm do I just like these couple years and then everything else is but I think what they did in that short time frame is just insane.
I will give them a lot of credit for even the albums I don't really care for. There's usually one really good song on just about every album, which is pretty hard to do.
All right, so let us know what you think of Queen. I know this might be a little divisive. Obviously, they're popular enough to have won our poll, but we've also seen some comments to the contrary in the comments section. So we know everyone wasn't stoked about this video. So let us know how you feel about them down below. Leave your ranking and let us know what you think of our rankings. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet. Hit the bell for notifications. Check the description for all of our social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as our website. And come back tomorrow. We'll give you our top 10 favorite Queen songs. We'll see you then.